Welcome to Mysterious Goings On, the podcast about creativity, writing, and mystery. Every week, we talk about all kinds of great fiction and meet the people who write it. We also feature explorations about creativity in all walks of life. Your host, Alex Greenwood, will join you right after this.
This is Maddie Dalrymple, the author of the Ann Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts, and you're listening to Mysterious Goings On.
Say yes to any offer of a trip or an adventure. Hits me with a sharp and poignant nostalgia. It was a Jenny quality that will bring back her voice and ebullient spirit to me as long as I live. Can you imagine being passed and having that said about you? What kind of incredible life must you have led that someone close to you would say that about you? We're going to explore that a little bit today because we're going to be talking about a magnificent book that I am privileged to have in my possession. It's called Trusted Eye, Post-World War II Adventures of a Fearless Art Advocate. It is indeed a compelling narrative of an American wife and mother finding her place amid the rubble of 1940s war-torn Germany. It's a stunning contribution to the historical record of post-World War II Germany and the art world, and it's a beautiful, poignant tribute to an almost forgotten woman by her daughter, Claudia Chidester. Claudia, welcome to Mysterious Goings On.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Alex. Appreciate it.
It's a coffee table book, but when you say that, that just kind of drums up certain images here. But this is a very special work, and I'd love to just, before we get too deep into it, just ask you: was this the initial direction you thought, coffee table book, or did you have other ideas?
I always envisioned it to be a visual compilation of some kind. And it was a big debate with the designer, actually, what size, because there's so many images and it ended up growing into 4 inches. And weighing 4 pounds. And so, but it turns out that's the only way we could have done it. And I have other friends who have written similar biographical pieces about women in the art world, but their images are small or they're black and white and they leave most of it into the words, or they just do a little small insert in the middle. And I did another book before on my father's art called Work Standing Up. And that also it's his art. And so I really wanted the art to play have a conversation with the reader as much as the words. So yeah, I just went all in.
And it shows up on every page. It's beautiful. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous work. I'm kind of fanboying it a little bit too, because I was extraordinarily close to my grandfather, who was a writer. And he had a lot of papers and letters and poems and unpublished works and published works that are now out of print. I put together a volume of those for him. After he's been gone for 20 years, but I put together a volume of it, and it was a labor of love. And it's strangely, I thought no one would buy it, but it's touched a few people who felt that link. And when I saw this book and realized that this is, and pardon me for, it's not a pun at all, this is a love letter though to your mother from you, and it's magnificent. And without further ado, let's talk about Virginia Fontaine. Tell us about your mother.
So she was born in 1915, the middle of World War I, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And her grandfather was an artist, also had a printing company, and he was also a banker. So he bankrolled my mother to attend Yale, and that's where she met my father, Paul Fontaine. The war broke out, and they married in 1940, and then Dad went to Europe. And when the war was over, he couldn't get a boat home. There weren't enough boats. And so there's a lottery system. And so he was stuck there for 6 months. And finally he said, I'm just going to get a job with the armed forces as a designer. Why don't you come over, and it'll be 6 months. It'll be, mom's mom spoke some German and she loved art. And so she says, sure. And that turned into 25 years. The story of her growing up in more or less an artist family, but she was also a Girl Scout. She taught swimming. She did a lot of sports. So she was comfortable at all levels of meeting people in different milieus. And her mother was very much a socialite, but also believed in hard work. It was Christian Science. My mother was not a Christian Scientist. She, believed in living and burning the candle at both ends. Mother went to Yale for 4 years, but they did not graduate her. Her final painting, actually it's a 5-year program. What it required was that she would have to go back again or redo the year. And it was the 1930s. And my grandmother said, that's not going to happen. You need to come home and learn how to cook. And so it was really hard. And mother did go back, spent that year preparing to marry my father. But at the same time, she went into a studio. She painted all the time. She tried to get artist gigs. She continued her portraiture work. She did the best she could to continue that. And then, so that's her stick-to-itness was really the story. And then the book is all about the different arcs of trying and then failing and trying again. So I'm really pleased to hear that you actually are enjoying it. So
the epistolary nature of this, though, she was such a prolific and beautiful letter writer. Now, not a great speller, right? But boy, could she just, with a turn of phrase, and there was just this directness to her. The letters she sent to your grandmother, right, are so, I don't know, you tell me if I'm misreading these, but they're so provocative. It's kind of like
she's picking a fight. She's standing up for her beliefs at the same time. And when she was in Germany, she'd be writing letters almost every week, and it'd be about all the people that she was meeting and the artists, whether her mother knew who these artists were or not. She was going to document it regardless. And she did the same in her diaries. And I only have one letter of my grandmother coming back, and I reproduced most of it in the book because it was so harsh, basically telling my mother that she's, doing a disservice to the family, not cooking and cleaning and taking, whatever my grandmother's expectations were. And mother just kept on going. So she and even when she was at Yale, she would be writing weekly about all the parties she was going to. And she'd say something about the classes, but she didn't care who the reader was. She was not going to sugarcoat it. It was hilarious.
Yeah, she would detail all these things she did, what plays she saw, what gentleman asked her out, what Greek house she went to, and she talk about how much a theater ticket, $3 or something. She'd say all these wonderful things, and then she'd say, and of course, unfortunately, I only have $10 to live on for the rest of the month. And it was so wonderful. And send money PDQ, things like that. And she just so self-possessed. So it seems so. And you tell me, though, Claudia, of course, did she know who she was that early in her youth, or was it merely just her means of rebellion against the upbringing she just truly did not want to replicate in her own life? What do you think about that?
I think it's a combination of both, although the struggles throughout, she had a foundation. She did have a really strong foundation from her mother in terms of what her values were. She had a moral compass that was really rock solid. No matter what was going to happen, she always had that to fall back on. And I mentioned the fact that she knew her manners. She knew, how to treat people. So all these things came to her pretty naturally even when her own mother was harsh to her. So that part was, I think, her foundation. But in terms of rebellion, that was continuous. That's really, and even the armed forces, there was a stint there with, dealing with the monuments men, I thought was particularly poignant, because here she was called in by this head of the monuments men, accusing her of maybe purchasing art illegally. And she just said, no, sorry, you're wrong. I just have better taste in art than you do. And it just, that part, I think that's also a Midwestern thing, maybe, that she just had this character that was over the top.
Oh yeah, it was, and that section, yes. And of course, there's a point that I saw. This was something about an excursion down the Rhine on Hitler's yacht while GIs listened to Old Man River. She says, one might as well have been on the Mississippi. I've just finished another one of my days with the Army. I could roll what I think of the Army in a spitball and flush it down the toilet.
I'm glad you picked that out, because that was really a contentious point with her. My whole upbringing, I came along very late in her life. She was over 40 when I was born. So all these things about her past were not something that I knew about. There's just her dismissal of armed forces regulations, Army bureaucracy, Army anything. She was almost, it was classist for sure, but she also sometimes felt she had a point. So yeah, it was tricky. She didn't put up with it at all. And even there are other stories that are not in the book about that also speak to these are things that I remember, that some little boy was bullying me, and she went and called up the dad's boss, the captain above him, and told him, you got to keep this guy in control. He's not being nice enough. He's not, raising his son properly. And the boss made the guy play catch with him every day. And mother would look out the window to make sure it was happening. So yeah, that was a piece of her character, I thought.
Please take this comment in the spirit I intended. You see, I just fell in love with her. She's just a fireball. She's such an interesting, she's talented. She's urbane. She's been all these places. We don't have hours to talk here, but there's just certain parts that really stood out to me. Would you mind if I just brought up one or two and you could kind of elaborate?
Sure.
The chapter, we found ourselves helping the Jewish underground. That
was something that was new to me, and only happened after I started reading the letters. And this will happen to be a draft of a speech she was giving. And I don't know whether it was, or maybe it was a interview. I think it was a speech. And she simply says that she and my dad were running money down to Switzerland to help the Jews find their way to the Mediterranean and then Israel. And it was highly illegal. And but she said it stopped because there was a woman sergeant who was caught with $50,000 on her, was sent home, and mother didn't want to be sent home. But she entered, and my dad both were doing it. And it was something that the American Armed Forces were doing illegally. So my parents were not alone by a long shot. And I spent a whole year reading the Stars and Stripes newspaper, looking for evidence of this woman, this sergeant, being deported back. But I found a ton. I didn't find that exact one. People forget things in their memories, exactly numbers and such. So it was difficult to search. But I found tons of other examples of raids being done to catch people with either contraband or, in this case, cash. So I knew it was completely plausible that some of the armed forces might, in fact, even be providing trucks with false plates and such, but then would be caught and be sent back. And it was very, very tricky. But the left arm was sort of winking at the right arm, trying to help the Jews at the same time, all saying it was illegal, because the British were on a tricky balance there, trying to appease both the Arabs and both sides. So the Americans weren't supposed to be doing that, but we did it anyway because we knew it was right.
It's magnificent. Well-traveled is doesn't even cover it. Her years as a newlywed to Paul, your father, in the British Virgin Islands. He was an artist, obviously, as you said. How did they work together in that regard? Was his art a certain school of art and hers a different one, or how was that?
So Dad was classically trained, an amazing artist, and at Yale he was top of his class, number one, and they gave him a scholarship to paint anywhere he wanted to upon graduation, which was in 1940. And soon the war was going to break out. So although it hadn't broken out yet, it had broken out in Europe, but it hadn't. So he couldn't go to Europe, which is where most artists were going. So they chose to go to the British Virgin Islands, Tortola, because it was one of the underpainted, quote unquote, places. Father's art, and his job as Yale was going to fund him for the entire year. His job was to sort of find his voice in writing, but voice as a painter as well. Find his style, find out who he really was. And he was already a master watercolorist. So they started out doing oils, and mother thought for sure she could do portraiture down there. And they both brought their oils with them. But what happened, were living in a thatched hut, thatched roof, and the thatch would fall onto their paintings. And so Dad quickly switched to watercolor because he could. Mother didn't have that skill. And then secondly, she thought she could paint the locals. The locals wouldn't have it, and she couldn't even photograph them. Oh. So she just took to writing about and documenting. So I have a big diary of all of her, and then her letters that she'd write back to her mother. But she was very sad. It was very sad for her that was the case, and but Dad painted over 100 watercolors and sent them back to Yale. And then Mother, actually, they did a show there. I mean, sort of built her chops on curating art by helping Dad find show. And then Dad was drafted in 42. And so Mother spent those years, 40 and 42, and until the end of the war in 40, 45, 46, she spent all that time learning about how to curate by working in the Milwaukee Art Museum. So she didn't lose any time, but she did not go back to actual painting. Plus, she had my older sister who was born. So she was having to be a mom as well. So it was tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The I was trying to, as I recall, I read recently, trying to find the right light in a room, and then your father got hot, and then moved you around. There she had the cat, and there's photographs of her with the cat. Yeah, it's I've been to Tortola, by the way. I've been to the BVI.
Oh, nice.
It's a gorgeous place to. I mean, there are worse postings.
There are worse postings. Yeah. So yeah, they had a bit of a struggle there, but she also became enamored with the expatriate life. That's where both of them figured out how you can be an American in any country and find your people. And so it was actually a good put your toe in the water kind of experience when going to Europe.
Right.
And then later Mexico too.
Right. And there's a lot about Mexico there. I wanted to step, and I know I'm jumping around.
That's okay.
And folks, when you buy the book, you can flip through the book and you can jump around like I have. And you should buy this book. It's lovely. Did we get to the bottom of why she flunked out of Yale on that? What happened, that final painting? Do you know? Do you understand what happened?
No, I don't know. I do have her grades. It was 69 and passing was 70. And there are letters of Dad trying to encourage her to keep writing to the dean, saying, no, let her come back. And, but she needed the money to go back. And, I have no evidence. I contacted Yale, believe me, many times to see if there's any records and such. And they gave me everything they have, but they don't have any, notes on why this painting wasn't good enough. And the thing is, that's really sad, is that particular painting, it may be the same painting or may not be, is now owned by the Milwaukee Museum of Art. And that's what started this whole project, is me stumbling on the painting and say, oh my God, she was a great artist. Look at this painting. And in fact, it's going to be brought back into the main galleries in the museum this coming summer. And I'm going to go up there for the opening. So it's not Dad's style. Dad was very different, and his final work is lost. So all I have is a black and white of it. But anyway, it was good enough for Milwaukee. So,
right, but that, as you said, that spurred this project. Did your sister have any thoughts on the project at the time?
Yeah, so she was right by my side. We worked on it, especially curating what paintings to put in, what art to put in, what stories. But I had a great editor who redlined a ton out of it, and I got comfortable with that.
It's not always the easiest thing, right? Especially when you're dealing with stuff that's so close to your heart. And the book is gorgeous. Trusted Eye. As you said, it's how many inches did you say this is about 4 inches or so?
Yeah, 2.5 inches.
2.5 inches. It's huge, but we have black and white. What I also love, though, the stuff that I love too, because they're these wonderful artifacts. The 1945 day diary that's for 1951, and this lovely blue ink, and this, you could just looking at her handwriting. And see, you know what I'm doing here, though, Claudia? I'm trying to fill in the blanks. I never knew her, but I feel like I kind of knew her now a little bit. So I'm filling in the blanks a little bit, and I'm ascribing a lot of character to her handwriting that may not even be there, but for me, it's there. And I think that's one of the things that's really lovely about the design of this book as well.
Mm-hmm. It is, yeah, terrific design. The same designers I had for Dad's book. But you're right about her handwriting. That she was a lefty, and of course they always try to correct you and make you a righty in those days, but she obviously stayed a lefty. Yeah, writing was so squished together because she tried to fit all these details. I mean, there'd be a party almost every day in a year, or every other day, and that's like 200 some odd parties, and all the people, and all squished in, and the ink would bleed through. I had it transcribed. That was the only way I was going to be able to read it. I actually hired a transcriptionist. So, and also be able to search on it. And we came up with almost 400 names that through her letters and diaries and the guest books. It's really extraordinary. And at least 3/4 of them have Wikipedia articles about them already. So it's not, to me, it's also an almanac of the 20th century, and to sort of get a taste of what, people who don't know that whole through the lens of a woman and her own struggle. I just think that mixture what might be interesting to people.
Absolutely. I was going to say it is kind of I like your word better, but it is kind of a time capsule as well. And it also brought to mind, maybe your mother wouldn't approve of this comparison, but when I read A Movable Feast, Hemingway's book, a nonfiction book, but just the way that she is such a good chronicler of what she's doing, the people she's with, and she fills in just enough of the specifics that, as I said kind of earlier, your mind can kind of fill in the rest. I think just exquisite work as a writer.
I'm glad you're saying that, because I think she doesn't always do it, but when she does do it, tell you exactly what it's like to walk in the room, or what the environment is like, what they're eating, all these different things that give you a full sense of place and time and struggle. But she's never maudlin about it. She doesn't go into any, she mentions once, I think, about the smell, the fact that Germany was burning, and the rubble and the just decomposing of bodies was still existent, things like that. But it's not repeated much. So she keeps a pretty light tone, actually, just one foot in front of the other.
Was there one thing we already alluded to or discussed, the helping the Jewish immigrants, that you didn't really know about in her lifetime? But was there something about what you learned from all the amassed things that you went through about your mother that perhaps you didn't know, or surprised you, or was a revelation?
Well, the Jewish underground was the biggest revelation. I was also trying to because I came along so late, and our family always had stories. I had evidence. So, for instance, her relationship with the dance company, Mary Wigman, she became a photographer for them, and then seeing the actual images of Mary Wigman and these beautiful people and what they were doing. And Mary was already much older, and she's sort of like the Martha Graham of Europe. She's sort of queen in all of modern dance. And Mother took such great care to try to document. And I only heard briefly about, she always would talk about Mary Wigman, but I didn't know exactly how much of it. She, photographed them for almost 2 or 3 weeks. And for this one particular, they call it a congress, but it's like a conference for dancers, where dancers come from all over the world, or Europe anyway, and learn and take classes under Mary or other instructors. That part was just really moving to me, that she was really honing her craft. She really wanted to be an photo essayist, and she's trying to get her photo essays published into magazines. They only happened once in Dance Magazine, but for Mary Wigman's story, which was wonderful. But I have in the archive, I have many, many photo essays that she was trying to get published. And unfortunately, I also found Dad's harsh words about, he didn't think much of her writing at all, and was very critical. And that was hard to hear. But my dad was a self-absorbed artist, so I can't really. That part I already knew, so that was not new. So.
Yeah. Well, also I can't help but the more I learn about Virginia Fontaine, I wonder what she would make of the age you and I live in.
Oh my goodness. She would be horrified, for one, of our lack of manners, our lack of social grace and patience. And I don't think she'd put up with it. When I was little, if any kid came along and behaved in a bad way, Mother would her harsh words would come easily to that little kid, and scare them. And so not many of my friends ever came around the house.
And scared them.
It was frightening stuff for little kids.
This is a person, this is a human being who unabashedly stood up for the things she believed, and everything from telling McCarthyism where it could go and helping the Jewish underground, to standing her ground with your grandmother, who had her other ideas about what she should be doing with her life, and she had her art. She was a visual artist, but again, I, as a writer myself, I just was. Don't get me wrong, the photos and the imagery, that's gorgeous, but I am so drawn to the way she expressed herself with the written word. And I dare say, there's even every now and then she had a little line. She wasn't quite Dorothy Parker, but boy, she could really get a zinger in there. I will tell you that. But I just think it's rare, and I hope it's not a lost art. The art of writing letters, besides it being a chronicle of your life and what's going on, but it's also, it gave her an expression for her own talent.
Yeah, thank you for saying that.
I think I'm gushing a little. I apologize, but I really found her a fascinating person. I really did.
Well, and I think, and she also spoke that way too. If you can think of a Midwestern accent or lack of one, and her straight back, and she spoke her word and her voice in every conversation. And so people trusted her. That's just why I called it Trusted Eye, because they not only trusted her eye for the art, but they also trusted her opinions. They trusted her connections. They trusted that she would always speak the truth about any kind of negotiation or relationship or any comments, which sometimes people didn't like to hear, but they would flock. She had so many girlfriends that just would not blink an eye to do anything for her because of all that they knew that she would do for them too. So,
right. The loyalty that she showed to her friends, and the ones she loved. I started this discussion with that lovely quote that was from that
Yvonne Hagen,
who was,
she was actually a writer for the Paris Herald Tribune, and she was the art critic, and she had a tragic story of her husband being killed in the Berlin airlift, and they met while at the same hospital, both giving birth to my sister and to her son, and they were fast friends ever since. So that's very, very long relationship.
Yeah, and as I said at the get-go, I mean, to have somebody say that about you when you're gone, my goodness. And to have this wonderful, incredible book that you've put together here, Claudia, it's so magnificent. If I could just one little bit more of affirmation. A Kirkus review said that it's a vivid recollection of Fontaine's fascinating life emerges, one that the author allows to be conveyed largely through Fontaine's letters, a strategy that provides her with a measure of objectivity despite her obvious love and admiration for the subject. Yeah, I should have just read that instead of me rambling on, huh? But
no, that's and that's how I want to do. I wanted just to have her be her voice, this book be her voice, and I just stitched it together and provided a little backstory here and there, and my little sidebars once in a while of my perspective, but not much.
And I'm remiss that I didn't mention that you adding perspective to a lot of this with your sidebars are very important to this book as well, I think too. I think it's a splendid book. The book is Trusted Eye, Post-World War II Adventures of a Fearless Art Advocate. And it's a beautiful, poignant tribute to an almost forgotten woman by her daughter, Claudia Chidester. Claudia, I'll give you the last word. Where can we find this? And where's your website and all that good stuff?
So if you go to fontaine.org, FONTAINE.org, there's also a look inside option there. So you can take a little taste and see some of the book. A lot of people aren't comfortable buying a big book, coffee table book, without getting a sense of what's inside. So there's one place to buy it, but you can also go to Amazon. Or if you're in Milwaukee, you can go to Boswell Books, it has it, or the Milwaukee Historical Society. Or if you're here in Austin, Book People has it. So there's a few small booksellers that I really want to support. And but of course, Amazon has it as well, or you can buy it from the website.
Folks, if you go to your local bookstore and they don't have it, they'll order it for you. And that way you're helping out your local bookstore. And, I think Mr. Bezos has enough money to shoot big phallic rockets into space. So I think he doesn't need your money, and the local bookstores do. Claudia Chidester, if I haven't said it already, I think I already have. I love this book. I am in awe of your mother. I'm in awe of, though, also your ability to pull all this together in such a beautiful and entertaining way. Thank you so much for telling this story here on Mysterious Goings On.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for having me.
Have you lost your belief in finding a really good mystery thriller? Well, trust me, you've got to have faith. Pilot's faith. Kirkus Reviews says of the book that Greenwood pulls many tricks from his writer's satchel, has a quirkiness and energy, and snappy, snarky dialogue that keeps things moving briskly. A well-handled mystery with the appropriate twist at the end. Midwest Book Review says newcomers to Pilot will find no barriers to quick immersion in his personality and situation, while prior series readers immediately become involved in another conundrum which tests his skills and the ways in which others view him in his world. Surviving a recent attempt on his life, a weary John Pilot returns to Cross Township, where a bizarre string of shootings has paralyzed the tiny college burg. Pilot joins forces with the law to find out why people are being terrorized in his name and stop it. Unfortunately, when he turns to his family for support, he finds only hardened hearts. People are dying, accusing fingers are being pointed his way, and he has nowhere left to turn. Everything John Pilot believes in, family, sanity, and even himself, are shaken to the core in Pilot's faith. Online Book Club says, "It's a gripping and fun story that kept me hooked. Greenwood's writing style is dynamic, and the book reads like a movie script." You can get John Pilot Series number 8, Pilot's Faith, exclusively in paperback and ebook on Amazon.com. And remember, in the end, it all comes down to faith. Pilot's Faith. A Caroline Street Press book by J. Alexander Greenwood.
Thanks for joining us on Mysterious Goings On. Be sure to follow Mysterious Goings On wherever you get your podcast and never miss an episode. Don't forget, you can get the links to books and other things mentioned on the show at mgopod.com. Until next time, keep reading.